So let's now continue working on this page and let's work towards a more realistic page. And for that, we're also going to dive into more Django template features, which also come in handy when building more realistic pages. There are two main things which I want to do now. I want to use what we learned about templates to enhance this template a little bit and write the actual HTML code which we need for this project. And then I also later want to add a second URL and view so that we don't just have a page for all the meetups, but also a page for a single meetup after we clicked on a meetup so that we have a detail page for a meetup. But let's start with changing that overall HTML code here on this main all meetups page. In here, in the end, in this body part here, I want to add a main element with my main content of this page. And above that, actually a header with my, header for this page. And in this header, I want to have a nav bar, which in this case should have only one link, which will act as our logo for this page. And the logo here could be some text like Django Meetups, if that's the name of our website here. And then here, when we click that link, I always want to go back to /meetups. So mydomain.com/meetups in the end, though we don't need to add our domain here. If we just have /meetups here, if we click that link, that will automatically be appended after our domain and will take us back to our starting page, basically. Now below that, I want to have a h1 tag, still in the header, where I output some main title, which I want to show to the user. And here this could be, we got great meetups coming up. Something like this. And below that, maybe a paragraph with some explanation text that belongs to this title, like find the one that best suits your needs. That could be the starting part of our page here. And then in the main element, I want to have the main content that makes up this page. And here we could have a section, for example, where we output all our meetups. So here we could have an upcoming meetups title, and below that, a ordered list with all those meetups which we want to render. And that's now the part which I want to output dynamically here, because we have this meetups dummy array, and therefore I want to loop through all those items again to then output them. I will just enrich them a little bit here and not just output the title or not just add the title, but also a location, which to keep things simple could just be New York, and for the second meetup it's let's say Paris, like that. And then I'll add a so-called slug, which will be a unique identifier that has a URL-friendly format and a search engine optimized format. Something like a first meetup written like this, so with no special characters, no blanks, but still relatively human readable. And you see this quite often on a lot of pages, that in the URL you have some unique identifiers for different pages, but they typically are human readable and contain some real sentence in them instead of just a cryptic combination of characters, which could also be unique but is less human readable. And therefore here I'll use these slugs. So that's my updated meetups data here, which I want to use. And here I'll quickly restructure this to make this a bit more readable now. Like this. And now we got our meetups passed into this view. And here we now did learn how we can loop through them with the for tag, and then also end for to mark the end of this. And then go through all our meetups here, just as we did it before, but now I'll output a list item for every meetup, and in that list item we now can output some markup. And I'll add a bit of a more complex markup now. For example, I'll give this list item a class of meetup item, since I will soon provide more CSS styles which we can add here to have nicely styled meetups here. And then I'll add an article here inside of the list item. And in there, I'll have a div with a class of meetup summary, which holds yet another div with a class of meetup image, because we're later going to add an image for our meetups. For the moment, this will be an empty image. I don't have a source yet. I'll just prepare it already, but we'll add the actual image later. And next to that div with the image, I'll have another div which receives a class of meetup details, meetup dash details, where I have a h3 tag where I want to output with interpolation, so with the double curly braces, meetup item.title. So the title of that specific meetup. And below that, we can add an address element and then output meetup item.address like this. Sorry, meetup item.location, since in views.py I added a key named location here. And keep in mind, you always use the dot notation here in the templates. So now with that, we're outputting some markup for all those meetup items. There's one last piece of markup left, which I want to add in a separate div right before the end of this article. That div will receive a class of meetup actions. And in there, I want to have an anchor tag. Currently, it leads nowhere, but on it, I'll say more details, and I'll give it a class of btn. And now all of that will only work if we add more CSS styles. That's why attached you also find a meetup-detail CSS file, which will actually add more styles, which I prepared for you, which we need for the meetup items we're outputting here. And then index.html, I'll therefore add a second link where I again use this static tag, but where we now import meetups/styles/all_meetups.css, this newly added file. And it should be all meetups with a dash actually. And now if I reload, that looks a bit better. Now the image is missing, we'll add it later, but the meetup items look better. The header here does not though, because here we also need to add more markup or more CSS classes. On the header, specifically, you should add the ID attribute and set this to main-header. And on this logo anchor tag, you should add the ID attribute and set this to main-logo. And with those changes made, that is now the final look, except for the missing images, which I want to have for this first page in the end. Now, before we work on those images and on real data which we use, let's work on this more details button on this link here. And let's make sure that we have a details page that can be loaded, and of course, that we can also navigate there.